So get this. We've got a whole bunch of stuff to dig into today. There's this book review, super positive, about a guide that's all about changing your habits to, get this, change your life.
Sounds ambitious.
Right. But then we've got an article that says even just one tiny little habit can snowball into, like, huge changes. So, like, which is it? Big changes or tiny changes?
Well, that's what we're here to find out.
Exactly. And then, just to throw a curveball, we've got this, like, philosophical piece that's actually questioning the whole idea of rigid routines. Like, maybe they're actually holding us back.
Interesting. It's definitely more nuanced than just do this habit every day and your life will be perfect.
Right. And then, just to make things even more interesting, there's this YouTube story about honesty as a habit.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Honesty is a habit. That's not something you hear every day.
I know, right? Buckle up, because we're going to dive deep into all of this and try to make sense of it. I have a feeling this is going to be one of those episodes with lots of aha moments.
Definitely. I'm already curious to see how these different sources connect the dots between, the practical steps and the bigger questions about, like, how we actually want to live.
Exactly. Like, we all know habits are important, but what's the real impact? Can they help us live better, more fulfilling lives? And what about those times when a habit just feels like it takes over and you're like a robot just going through the motions? Not very mindful, right?
Yeah, that autopilot feeling. Not great.
So that's what I'm hoping we can unpack today. Let's start with this book review that really grabbed my attention. It's for a book called Change Your Habits, Change Your Life. Catchy title, right?
It gets right to the point.
Totally. And the reviewer is just gushing about how practical and, like, compassionate the author's approach is. Apparently, this author totally transformed his own life with this stuff, even going on these crazy treks.
Wow, that's impressive. I think that personal experience is probably what gives the book so much power. It's one thing to read advice, but when you see someone who's actually lived it, it makes it so much more believable.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not just about those big dramatic changes either. The reviewer talks about how even something as simple as, like, the way you put on your socks, wait, what? Can reveal these deeper patterns in your thinking. It's kind of mind-blowing.
Okay, now you have to explain that one. Putting on socks.
Right. So the author breaks habits down into these manageable compartments, which I think is brilliant. It feels way less overwhelming than trying to change everything at once.
That makes a lot of sense. I think so many people get stuck because they think they need to make massive changes all at once, and it just feels impossible.
Yeah, totally. Like, I've been there trying to change too much at once and it always backfires. I just end up feeling more stressed and less likely to stick with anything.
So maybe this compartmentalized approach is the key. Just focus on one thing at a time, master it, and then move on to the next.
Right. Makes you think even those little everyday things can be like a gateway to bigger changes.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, what's one tiny habit that anyone listening could change today that might set off a ripple effect down the road? Like, what if they started drinking an extra glass of water each day, or took the stairs instead of the elevator?
Oh, I like that. It really makes you think about those small choices and how they could potentially lead to bigger shifts.
Yeah, and maybe that's the beauty of habits. It's not about being perfect. It's about finding those small wins that add up over time.
Now, speaking of small wins adding up, this next article from Tiny Buddha, I love that website, by the way, it really gets into that. It tells this story of this guy who just started doing 30 push-ups a day. Like, that's it.
Okay, not too intimidating. Most people could probably handle that.
Exactly. But here's the thing. It wasn't just about getting ripped or whatever. Those push-ups sparked this whole chain reaction of positive changes in his life.
Really? Tell me more.
So get this. The push-ups, they made him feel good, stronger, more confident, and that inspired him to learn English.
Wow. Okay, I see where this is going. One thing leads to another.
Right. And then because he could speak English, he started traveling the world, meeting new people, discovering all this stuff about self-development and mindfulness.
That's incredible. It's like those 30 push-ups were the key that unlocked all these other possibilities.
Exactly. And the article talks about how he eventually became a reader, which he'd never been before.
That's wild. It makes you think about the compounding effect, not just with money, but with personal growth. Like, remember that analogy with the penny that doubles every day for a month?
Yeah, ends up being worth millions.
Exactly. It seems insignificant at first, but over time, the impact is huge.
So what if we applied that to our habits? What if we focused on making those tiny 1% improvements every day? Like, could those small changes actually lead to radical transformations in our lives?
Absolutely. The 1% rule is powerful
Hmm.
because it's not about making these big dramatic changes that you can't sustain. It's about consistently making small adjustments that eventually steer you in a completely different direction.
So, like those tiny course corrections that pilots make, over time, they end up in a completely different place.
Exactly. It's a really powerful way to think about personal growth.
Okay, so let me put you on the spot. What's one tiny habit that you could change today? Something seemingly insignificant that might put you on a totally different path 5 years from now.
Oh, wow. That's a tough one. Let me think.
It's a big question, right? It makes you really think about those little things that we often take for granted.
Yeah, for sure. I guess for me, it might be something as simple as spending 5 minutes each morning just being present, focusing on my breath, and setting an intention for the day.
Oh, I like that. Simple but powerful.
And who knows? Maybe that one small change could have a ripple effect on my mood, my productivity, and my overall well-being.
Now, we've talked about the practical approach, the small changes adding up over time. But now I'm really curious to hear about this article from Medium that takes a more philosophical approach. They use this metaphor of a sword master and his apprentice, which sounds pretty intense.
It is a really interesting metaphor. So
Yeah.
basically, the master is criticizing his apprentice for being too focused on routine. The
Okay.
apprentice is all about repetition and mechanics, but the master is like, no, true mastery comes from deep understanding, not just blind repetition.
Okay, I see where this is going. It's like, yeah, habits can be helpful for building those initial skills, but if we become too reliant on them, we might miss out on the nuances, the intuition, the creativity that comes with true mastery.
Exactly. And that's where the article gets really interesting. It challenges us to ask ourselves, are our habits serving us? Or are they mindlessly dictating our lives? Are we just on autopilot, missing out on the richness of the present moment because we're so focused on going through the motions?
Whoa, that one hit close to home. I'm definitely guilty of that sometimes. Like, I get so caught up in my routine that I forget to actually appreciate what I'm doing.
It happens to the best of us.
Yeah.
But the key is to become aware of it and make a conscious effort to be more present.
So I guess the question is, how do we find that balance between the structure of good habits and the freedom to be spontaneous, to be adaptable?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And I think it's something we'll keep coming back to as we explore these different sources. It's not about throwing out all routines, but about finding that sweet spot where our habits support us without limiting us.
Okay, so we've got practical tips, we've got philosophy, and now I'm really curious about this YouTube story about honesty as a habit. It's like a curveball in this whole habit conversation.
It is, but I'm ready for it. Hit me with a story.
Okay, so it's about this king who wants to choose his heir, right? So he gathers all these young people in his kingdom and gives each of them a seed. He tells them to plant it, nurture it, and come back in, like, I don't know, a year or something.
Okay. Sounds pretty straightforward so far, like a test of responsibility and gardening skills.
Right. But here's the twist. The king boiled all the seeds beforehand, so they couldn't possibly grow.
What? No way. So it was a trick.
Yeah, he wasn't actually looking for the best gardener, he was testing their honesty.
Oh, wow. That's sneaky. So I'm guessing most of the kids came back with these beautiful plants that they clearly got somewhere else,
Yeah.
hoping to impress the king.
You know it. But there was this one young man who was like, nope, my seed didn't grow. He just came back with an empty pot.
That took guts. I mean, imagine the pressure to succeed and then to just admit you failed.
Right. And you know what? That honesty earned him the kingdom. The king was like, this is the kind of leader we need, someone who's truthful, even when it's hard.
That's such a powerful message. It's like, even when it seems like everyone else is cutting corners, honesty really is the best policy.
Totally. But how does that fit into this whole idea of habits?
That's a great question. And I think it's something we should definitely explore more in part two. We've got these threads of practicality, self-discovery, and even philosophy weaving together here.
I'm already hooked. This is turning into a really fascinating deep dive. I can't wait to see where it goes next.
Me too. This is what I love about exploring these ideas. You never know what you're going to uncover.
All right, so we're back, and I gotta say my mind is kind of blown after that first segment. It's like we've opened this Pandora's box of ideas about habits, and I'm like, whoa, there's so much to unpack here.
Right, we've only just scratched the surface.
Exactly. So
Okay.
many different angles to consider. Okay, so let's zoom back in on that book review for Change Your Habits, Change Your Life. I keep thinking about this habit train idea. It sounds kind of scary, like something you don't want to mess with.
Well, it's not about being afraid of it. It's more about understanding how it works. So the idea is our individual habits are like train cars, all linked together, forming these patterns that kind of reinforce each other.
Okay, I get the analogy, but how do you actually change it? Like, how do you derail a habit train without, you know, causing a major crash in your life?
That's where the author's compartment approach comes in, remember? You focus on one compartment, one specific area of your life or routine at a time.
Right, right. Instead of trying to change everything at once, which I'm definitely guilty of, and it never works.
It's overwhelming.
Right.
This way, you break down the habit into smaller, manageable steps. Like instead of trying to overhaul your entire diet overnight, you start by swapping out soda for water.
Okay, so it's like focusing on one train car at a time instead of trying to derail the whole train. Makes sense.
Exactly. And by making those smaller changes consistently, you gradually shift the momentum of the entire train. Less disruption, more lasting change.
I like that. It feels way more doable than those New Year's resolutions that, let's be honest, who actually sticks to those?
Right. It's about making sustainable changes.
Totally. Okay, so the book also talks about these foundational habits like getting enough sleep, eating healthy, staying hydrated, moving your body.
The basics, but so important.
I know, I know. It just, those are the things I'm always like, yeah, yeah, I'll get to that tomorrow. But maybe that's part of the problem. I put them on the back burner while I'm chasing after these other, like, more exciting goals.
It's easy to do that. We get caught up in the big picture and forget about those fundamental habits that actually form the foundation for everything else.
It's like trying to build a house on a shaky foundation. No matter how fancy the house is, if the foundation's weak, it's not going to last.
Exactly. These foundational habits are the building blocks for a healthy and fulfilling life. And they often have a ripple effect, making it easier to cultivate other positive habits.
So, like, if I actually get enough sleep, maybe I'll actually stick to my workout routine.
It's possible. When you're well rested, you have more energy, focus, and willpower to invest in other areas of your life.
Okay, so I'm starting to see the connections here. It's not just about isolated habits, it's about creating a system that supports, like, our overall well-being. Now, I remember the book review also talked about breaking down even simple tasks into individual steps, like brushing your teeth. Seems so basic, but
Even brushing your teeth can be a multi-step process. And by breaking it down, you become more mindful of each step, which can lead to better results.
yeah, you know what? I actually brush my teeth on an autopilot half the time. I'm like thinking about a million other things. Maybe I should slow down and pay more attention.
It's a great example of how mindfulness can play a role in even the smallest habits. By being present, we can identify areas where we might be slipping into mindless routines.
Okay, so we've got foundational habits, breaking things down, mindfulness. There's a lot to take in. Now, can we circle back to that parable about the king and the boiled seeds? I'm still kind of processing the whole honesty as a habit thing.
It is a unique story.
Hmm.
And I think it highlights how honesty is valuable, even when it's tough. Remember, most of those kids lied to the king, thinking it would get them the reward.
Right. But it was the one who was honest, even though he failed, who ultimately earned the king's respect.
Exactly. And that's where the idea of cultivating honesty as a habit comes in. It's about making honesty a guiding principle in all areas of your life, big and small.
So instead of telling a little white lie to avoid an awkward conversation, I should just be upfront, even if it's uncomfortable.
It's not always easy, but the benefits are worth it. Honesty builds trust in relationships, reduces stress, and ultimately just makes you feel better about yourself.
Yeah, I can see that. And you know what? When I think about people I really admire, they're all super honest. Like, they're not afraid to speak their truth.
It becomes a part of who they are, and it inspires others to do the same.
Okay, so if honesty can be a habit, what other traits could we cultivate through practice? I'm thinking courage, kindness, patience.
Ooh, that's a good question. And it's empowering, right? If we can apply these principles to build those qualities.
Imagine the possibilities. Okay, I want to shift gears for a minute and go back to that tiny Buddha article about the guy who started with 30 push-ups. It's amazing how that one small thing snowballed into such a huge transformation.
It really highlights the ripple effect that even seemingly insignificant habits can have. We don't need some grand event to make positive changes. We can start right now.
And the article emphasized consistency, too. It's not enough to just start. You got to stick with it.
Absolutely. It's like building a muscle. It takes time and effort to see results. And just like a muscle can weaken if you stop working it out, our habits can too.
Okay, I'm getting the fitness analogies, but it's true. I've definitely fallen off the wagon with good habits before, and it's always harder to get back on track.
It happens. The key is not to beat yourself up about it. Just acknowledge it, learn from it, and keep going.
Progress over perfection. Right.
Exactly. And that's what the 1% rule is all about. Small, consistent efforts over time lead to big results.
It's like that penny analogy again. It seems small, but the compound effect is huge.
So powerful. It reminds us that those tiny efforts we make each day really do matter.
Okay, so lots of great takeaways here. Now, let's revisit that Medium article with the sword master and apprentice. It had a different perspective on habits, cautioning against too much routine.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that while habits can be great, we don't want them to make us, like, rigid and uncreative.
The master called it a disgrace to the art of living. Strong words.
He's making a point that the article is asking, are habits helping us live fully, or are we just going through the motions? Have we lost touch with our intuition and creativity?
It's like habits can be a double-edged sword. They give us structure, but they can also trap us if we're not careful.
Exactly. We need to be mindful and know when a habit is serving us and when it's time to break free.
So it's not just about following the to-do list, but also checking in with myself, seeing how I feel, listening to my intuition.
Yeah, finding that balance between discipline and freedom.
Okay, this has been so insightful. Now, I'm really curious how all of this connects to that story about honesty as a habit. It feels like a missing piece of the puzzle.
It does, doesn't it? And I think it's the perfect segue into our final part. We've got all these threads, practical tips, personal growth, philosophy, and now this intriguing connection to honesty.
I can't wait to tie it all together. Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back to unravel the mystery of honesty as a habit. Okay, so final part of our deep dive. And I gotta say, my brain is like,
Fool?
in a good way, of course.
I know what you mean. We've covered so much ground, haven't we? Practical stuff, deeper questions, inspiring stories.
It's like we've looked at habits from every angle. And honestly, I'm seeing them in a totally new light.
And that's what I love about exploring these kinds of topics. You don't always get a simple answer, but you end up with like a richer understanding.
Totally. For me, one of the big things I'm taking away from all this is the power of those tiny changes. Like that story about the push-ups, that really stuck with me.
Me too. It's such a good reminder that we don't have to wait for some big life-changing moment to make a change. We can start, literally, right now.
Yeah, and the article emphasized consistency, right? It's not enough to just start. You got to stick with it.
Absolutely. It's like anything worthwhile, it takes effort. It's like, imagine you're learning a new language. You wouldn't expect to be fluent after one lesson, right?
No way. It takes practice, day after day.
Exactly. And those small, consistent efforts over time, they lead to big results.
It's like that penny analogy again. It seems insignificant at first, but that compound effect is crazy powerful.
So powerful. It reminds us that those tiny efforts we make each day, they actually add up to something big.
Okay, so lots of great takeaways here. Now, I want to circle back to that Medium article with the sword master and apprentice. It had a different perspective on habits, kind of cautioning against too much routine.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that while habits can be great, we don't want to become like robots, just going through the motions without any thought.
The master in that story, he actually called it a disgrace to the art of living.
He did. He was making a point, though. He was saying that if we're so focused on routine, we might miss out on the beauty and spontaneity of life.
Okay, I'm starting to see where he's coming from. It's like habits can give us structure, but they can also trap us if we're not careful.
Exactly. We need to be mindful and aware of when a habit is serving us and when it's time to maybe try something new, break free from the routine a little.
So it's not just about checking things off a to-do list. It's about being present, listening to our intuition, seeing what feels right in the moment.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance.
Okay, so we've talked about all this stuff, practical tips, the deeper questions, but I keep coming back to that story about honesty as a habit.
Me too. It's such a simple story, but it really makes you think.
It's like in a world where everyone's trying to get ahead, maybe just being honest, even when it's hard, that's the real key.
It might be the most important habit of all, because honesty builds trust. It deepens our connections with others. It helps us live with integrity.
Totally. Okay, so as we wrap up, I just want to say I feel like I've learned so much from this deep dive, and I'm feeling really inspired. Like I can actually take this information and make some positive changes.
Me too.
I know.
And I hope our listeners are feeling that way too. It's been a really enriching conversation.
It has. So to everyone listening, we want to hear from you. What's resonating with you? What's one small step you can take today to put these ideas into action?
Remember, you don't have to do it all at once. Just pick one thing and start there.
Yeah, one tiny change can make all the difference. So that's it for this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and remember the power of those tiny habits.